You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley Fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Coursey.
All right, welcome to another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places, talking about the Wyoming State Shooting Complex Task Force. Joining me today, guests, we have some folks from industry. We have Aaron Davidson, owner of Gunwerks, and Cade Maestas from Maven Optics, as well as Senator Hicks, Larry Hicks, the chair of the Wyoming State Shooting Complex Task Force. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you all here. Just wrapping up day 2 of a meeting in Casper, a monumental day, a historic day, really, down to 2 final candidates after 9 proposals put forth. But I think Senator Hicks is probably worth us going back a little bit and just provide a little history. If you haven't been following this process, if you're not aware of it, the state has put forth an unprecedented effort to invest $10 million into what was deemed at our very first meeting to become a world-class shooting facility for the state of Wyoming.
Yeah, so Josh, the genesis of this stuff actually started with the discussion with Nephi Cole, who is Director of Public Affairs for the Shooting Foundation. And he had mentioned something about these world-class shooting events. And to me, I was unknown that the level of participation and the growing activity and the economics associated with this. And I had a chance to explore this, did a little bit of research into it, looked to see what was going on. And this is a really big deal in the United States, and particularly in the western United States. So I work with a number of co-sponsors. On the Senate side, I carried the legislation, and then Art Washut was my House co-sponsor, and we were able to get this across the line. But what it effectively did is provided there's an appropriation of $10 million, and it also set up the task force. The task force had 4 legislative members, and then a number of members that were specified in the legislation. Private industry had 2 positions. We've got those 2 gentlemen with us here today. Had conservation, and you serve in that capacity. We had other government agencies, because some of the models that you look at around the United States, some of these state agencies manage these facilities. Given with an eye is looking at the economic development associated with these type of facilities. We got the Business Council, we got the Game and Fish Department, we got Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resource Division on there. So that's the makeup of the 12-member task force. We actually started meeting over a year ago. That legislation was passed in 2022. We had our first meeting in 2023, and because there's no template for this type of a task force and a project like this, we've really had to create everything as we go. And the task force has spent a tremendous amount of time, develop ranking scores, criteria, developing preliminary letters of interest to culminate it and actually getting our request for proposals out there. Early on, we had 10 or 12 communities around the state of Wyoming that were looking. Some of them dropped out. We had 9 that submitted letters of interest and proposals. We narrowed those down as the task force through the development of a whole matrix of ranking criteria, from site to amenities to draw, future success, governance structure. There was like 54 different individual items that were categorized into 4 broad categories. We went through that process. These proposals are hundreds of pages long, and so there was a tremendous effort put forth by the task force to screen those down. We're now down to 2, and those 2 are Park County and Campbell County. They came with really strong proposals. The next step for this task force is to actually go out on the ground with those project proponents, look at their proposed sites, talk about the pro-con, finalize which is a reasonable governance structure for this type of facility, and then ultimately, what's the cost and the operations going to be? So we still have a lot of work to go forward, but we've done a lot of work, and we're down to 2. Those 2 horses are out of the gate and off and running, and we're going to pick the Derby winner here sometime later this summer.
You think back to James Wesley Powell's the exploration of the Colorado River system and getting all of this into these rafts and then setting to sail. We had the right people in the room, but we didn't have the oars. We've had to navigate these waters ourselves. Aaron, I'm real curious from your perspective, especially for someone as invested as you are to the shooting industry. How do you feel that the task force has done to get to this point and being able to navigate these waters really without a playbook to follow?
As we're getting close to the end here, I think the interesting thing that I've been contemplating is how all of a sudden a vision for what this looks like is starting to materialize. And over the last year, if you back up 9 months or 10 months, like we didn't really know. We had some images, some ideas, but as we get closer to the finish line, it's starting to gel up. It's starting to get firmed up. That's a very interesting progression. If we look at the timing, sometimes it's felt like we've moved at a fast pace and sometimes slow. But I feel like the ideas and the direction have matured appropriately. I think the timing's been good. I think the outcome looks like it's going to be very good. So if that's the case, I think we did a great job as a task force.
Much kudos to you and the effort you put in the scoring rubric and the feedback that was provided for that. I think that helped give us the guidance to know that we had to whittle this down. Cade, I'm curious to what your thoughts are. Initially, at the onset, I think it was very well documented that the task force was charged with having not only the state shooting complex, but the wow factor to accompany this, knowing that this would have an economic driving impact that Senator Hicks alluded to. Do you feel like we've gotten to that point with the two final selections?
I do. I think what we have on the table in front of us right now are two very different groups. And I go back to where we were last year and the blank canvas that we threw out to every community. And I think a lot of the communities were initially frustrated that we weren't telling them exactly what to do and what we wanted. But I think if we had done that a year ago, we wouldn't have what we're getting right now. They would have gone out and try and hit all of the check marks that we thought we wanted. And we've spent the last year educating ourselves on where we want to end up. And a lot of that has been through some good work by these individual communities, bringing different ideas and things forward. And like, oh, yeah, that works or that doesn't. While sometimes I've been frustrated with the speed where we are today, I don't think we could have lost anywhere in the top three. That's what makes them a tough choice too, right? Honestly, the 9-4 choice was pretty easy. The numbers, there were clear marks that separated certain communities. A little bit to my chagrin, like it would have been great if we could have really bolstered up Guernsey and given them some kind of big draw that completely changed their life. This isn't going to change the life of any of the two communities that it's set for. It's going to be an incremental change. But on the other hand, as we know with boom and bust cycles in Wyoming, putting one thing in that changes your life can lead to problems down the road as well. Winnowed itself down to where it makes sense. The communities that are now the front runners, Campbell and Park, both have a lot of skin in the game. They're both very interested in making this work and have a proven track record of being able to be successful in this area. So I think the whole project worked, at least to this point.
Speaking of the disciplines that this task force was able to identify that would be inclusive to this complex, a small group worked on that to present that to the entire task force. Aaron, you and Cade both, along with Judy Legursky and myself, we really looked at some of that from other complexes around the state, around the country, the growing trends within the industry. Certainly 3D archery is a fast and growing effort. But let's talk about a little bit on the 8 disciplines that were identified and how important those are, that we could find a landscape that would be able to encompass all of those. Because I think when we talk about world-class shooting complex for the state of Wyoming, I think that was the impetus that we had in mind, was to be able to be inclusive to all of them and have them be contained within one close proximity to be able to operate as a true complex.
Yeah, I think you have to check a lot of boxes. There's obviously a lot of short-range pistol matches where you need a lot of bays, but it could happen anywhere in the world, right? It could happen, and it does. It happens everywhere. You have your 100, 200, 300-yard square ranges that can be anywhere. And so I think what we really set out to do is figure out what we could own and make us unique. And the growing areas, and I think Aaron can talk a lot more on the rifle side, but the growing areas that are seeing the biggest boom in the industry are what I call the shoot and scoot sports, the mobile ones where you're 3D archery, not all standing on a line shooting at a bell down at 50 meters, but shooting this target, moving to another target. Same thing with the NRLs, all of these high terrain, high motion shooting disciplines, the sporting clays trails. And that requires something very specific that a lot of older existing ranges just are not going to be able to meet. They'll be able to meet those other things, and they do it very well. So how do we stand apart? We stand apart by hitting these things that are the up-and-coming market trends and doing it in a way that only Wyoming can provide.
and the topography of the landscape that really complements such. And I think, especially Aaron, with the industry that you are well positioned in and leading within that industry, when you talk about long-range shooting, what are some of the trends that you've seen within that industry that you feel like this complex in its design phase can really put forth truly what is the best available complex that any state could be able to present and attract people to come and visit Wyoming to participate at this complex?
I think one factor is that technology and equipment's gotten so good that the distances required need to be longer. So if a range was built out and you can shoot 600 or 700 yards on it, that's not going to cut it. Like even 1,000 yards is close. I think that's one of the pieces that obviously I was interested in seeing is a long enough distance where it can be a real challenge. So that I think the technology piece is definitely a part of that.
Yeah, Senator Hicks, what would you say to everyday Joe Sixpack in Chugwater or Sundance or Evanston from another corner of the state that isn't looking to host this in their backyard? What would you say the benefit is for them in Wyoming, that Wyoming is making this investment with taxpayer dollars?
I think this fits well with the entire culture of the state of Wyoming. We're the most pro-Second Amendment state. If you look at gun ownership in the United States, Wyoming has the highest ownership of guns. This is consistent with our overall statewide culture. That's very important that we maintain and we cultivate that culture and we grow it because we're very unique in that component. There's only just a very small number, handful of states that even could undertake this in today's environment, particularly today's anti-firearms environment. You know, the regulations that we see coming from all the other states and continual attempts for the federal government. So from a cultural standpoint, I think this is why there was broad support in the legislature for this, is because it is part of our legacy. It's our history. It's who we are as a people. And so that's important. The other things that's important is once anybody from the state of Wyoming, if we're successful as a task force, gets to go one time in their life and go shoot at this, they're going to walk away and say, that was the neatest thing I ever did. Was I went and shot at the Wyoming State Shooting Complex. It's back to what Cade said. This is not, and Aaron, this is just not your normal flat square bay or range. We're trying to create something that when you walk away, you're going, wow, that was a lot of fun today to go up there and shoot. And so a lot of people may never shoot here, but the opportunity exists right in their own state, and they need to be very proud of that.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. I think what was interesting is in the 9 proposals that were put forth, I think all of them regarded very highly the priority of how Second Amendment friendly Wyoming is and the culture and the heritage. I think the Commissioner Ford from Campbell County recognizing that the fastest growing varsity sport within Campbell County's high school is skeet and trap shooting. I think that's an opportunity for schools around the state to be able to utilize this complex. What challenges do you see trying to get from 2 to 1 at this point? There's a lot more to this than just having a beautiful site and a facility that can offer the accompaniments to the 8 disciplines that have been identified by this task force. When you talk about the governance structure of how this will operate, the costs associated with that, certainly I think that you two in the industry that you represent, not only are you Wyoming-based businesses, but I truly believe you're leaders within your realm of the industry. How much time and effort do you spend in positioning yourself to be a leader in what you represent within that industry? That's all marketing. And that branding and that ability to do that, I think there is probably some concern that folks might have that a state-run facility is not the right people to be running and branding and marketing something to lead that. But that is going to be a mix that we're still going to have to try to navigate and figure out how to get through. Do you have ideas on how that's going to look in your mind, Aaron? Because it may be completely different than what maybe you have, Cade, and I'm just interested.
I have pretty strong feelings that somebody needs to be on the hook to eat what they kill. At some point, there needs to be the pressure of success on the entity that's operating to make sure that that concern is there. This shouldn't be a casual attempt by any means for success. We're all putting our names on this selection and this recommendation. It's really important to me to know that who we select is going to take this where we want it to go.
Yeah, and I think I'd take away from a few meetings back where you really emphasized the priority, not on the site, but on the business development plan of what this would look like so it would succeed out of the gate. And I think we as a task force, I think we've been very mindful to know that's the optics that this needs. Do you think we're headed in the right direction with that?
I do, and I think that's, what I alluded to earlier about us finding a little bit more vision through this process of what may or may not work. I think some of the casual discussion we've had over the last couple of days of cherry picking some of the best pieces of the final proposals and figuring out exactly what's going to work best for the state, because the state isn't going to make a lot of money off this. There's not a direct return back to the general fund of $10 million after this has been operating for a few years, right? This is an investment in the future of Wyoming and an investment in the communities, and the communities are going to get that money back by hosting great events, bringing in great people. But if we set up a structure where they're doomed to fail because they're overburdened with operating costs, or where they're not being rewarded for success, and so they're just going through the motions each day, all of those are going to be detrimental to the communities and the state. And so setting them up where they're rewarded if they are successful in this is part of the puzzle, and also making sure they're on the hook. They're coming to us and asking for this money because they want it in their community, because they know that they're going to not directly dollar for dollar on the project itself, but the full hotel rooms, the full restaurants, the drawing of industry to their communities. That's where their investment pays off. And that's what we've got to be looking at in this governance structure and saying, okay, how do you honor the commitments that you made in the proposal? How do you stay the course to be successful for your community and for the state?
Anything you would add to that, Senator Hicks?
What I'm really cognizant of is that this facility has to have a long life expectancy. And so I'm really cognizant of the fact that we don't want to get short-sighted as a task force and say, well, what's the long-term success? Anybody can come out and run something really quick, and it's a new toy and it works really well, and then we lose interest in it as a community or as a state. And so I really want to focus on people that really have a long-term commitment, that it's part of their ingrained culture, and they've got the support system to do that, which means the elected officials at the local level and industry backing. And so looking at that nucleus, that this thing should have a whole support system around it in perpetuity to make sure this thing continues to grow and flourish. And I just worry that sometimes we may not be taking a long enough view of what success looks like. And I can't overemphasize, this thing will only succeed if you've got all those components of those. The state is an overarching umbrella. But at the end of the day, I think this task force has recognized it's better with somebody that's local, that has a passion and a desire to make this happen. But they also have to have the ecosystem or the environment to support that, which means elected officials that value what this task force or what the state shooting complex brings and what it can be out into the future. And so you have to have that elected, you have to have all that other infrastructure there to support this, which means private sector industry is backing this thing big time. It becomes an economic engine, just one of many, but I think we need to really pay attention to that. And that's something that as we get into these next two proposals, I want long-term success. I don't want an immediate flash in the pan. And I want to look at the infrastructure and how we guarantee that moving forward.
I think all of us have some sort of vision of down the road this really being built to, much like a high school that's building a new swimming pool. Are you building it big enough and to meet the needs of a potential collegiate type of event? Are we building this, or is this going to be built to be able to potentially have Olympic trial events or not leave anything on the table? And I think that tone was established right out of the gate, that this needs to be world class. When you talk about the ecosystem or the environment of industry, Aaron and Cade, both of you within that industry, we've seen this influx of interest in Wyoming across the state from not only your two operations, but we've seen other manufacturers and distributorships we've heard that have interest in Wyoming. How well do you think this complements being able to be that attractant to be able to bring others, like we've seen with Magpul and Weatherby and Freedom Arms, some established now Wyoming-based businesses within this industry? But what are some of the other industries that you think this actually complements and helps secure more of an attraction for those to come to the Cowboy State and do business here, knowing that Wyoming supports that industry?
I think the obvious overflow of Second Amendment related businesses is just super obvious. And a lot of times they're not here, at least initially, especially the smaller ones, they're moving here not for the support, but for the lifestyle. They learn about it because they came through Yellowstone, or they came to the Cody Firearms Experience, or they came to the National Trail Center here. They did a shoot at Glendo and realized they like the community, they like the lifestyle, and they know it's Second Amendment friendly. It's a complete juxtaposition, but it's a good example of how it works, is the International Climbers Fest in Lander. It's one of the largest climbing festivals in the world. People come to it, spend a week climbing in Lander, and we've had businesses relocate 5-6 years later after their first visit because they're like, wow, that was a really cool town. Now I'm getting ready to move my business for one reason or another. Where do I want to go? I want to go where I had that great experience and a supporting culture. And so I think no matter where this goes, Cody already has a great gun culture. There's a lot of manufacturers up there living within that category. Campbell County has a little bit less of that, but they have such a strong manufacturing base, an industrial base that can support growth in those industries. And I think it's just a natural draw that whether it's they come here because they love it and they come back and bring their business, or cottage industries spring up from the enthusiasts that are part of it, I think it's just a natural growth that we'll see over time. I don't know if you can plan it or necessarily foster it, but hopefully the Business Council can figure something out.
Yeah, any thoughts on that, Aaron?
I think I second the lifestyle bit. I think the draw to move here as a firearms industry or optics or associated businesses, I think the draw is really strong to move to Wyoming. But the reality is communities are very small. Labor force is non-existent. Housing's expensive. Wyoming has some challenges to overcome here. And you're seeing companies come in and be successful, but it's very slow. The advertising of what this shooting complex means is great, but I think just more infrastructure and build out, more support for jobs, more opportunities for income and revenue, more growth for economy. I think those things will do just as much to contribute and foster the growth of manufacturers moving to Wyoming. Like a bigger economy will support more companies.
Yeah. You probably have more pressure on you as a task force member now than any of the other remaining 11 of us, because one of the two final selections is in your backyard. I think people probably can connect the dots of your support for that. What will you be, Aaron, over the next couple of weeks before we have site visits? What will be the things that you're going to ruminate on to be able to come to fruition for you to know that you made this vote of your casting of where this should be with the best information available, not just that it was in close proximity to where your operation is at?
I think the location of the Park County proposal is superior. I think from a tourism draw, I think from a wow factor, I think from the terrain that exists on the site, very conducive to shoot and scoot type shooting. I think it's great. I think the real question is there enough money for Park County to do what we need done at that site? You go to the Campbell County one, and the money's there, the commitment's there. I think that the connected Camplex and industrial park and all these other pieces, I think those are very attractive for that 20-year vision of what this complex could mean for the state. The question is, does anybody want to go to Gillette? Does it have the draw to pull people there year after year? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I haven't been to Gillette for a long time, I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yeah, I second that. I think the way that this is designed in our process and the next steps for us to have those in-person site visits, to visit with those community leaders and those that are carrying the flag for this effort, I think it'll be very telling. What are some of the things, Senator Hicks, that you'll spend the next couple of weeks trying to ruminate upon to know that you want to be able to have these takeaways from both these sites to be able to make that very important final vote?
I think for me, the most important thing is I want that community that has the infrastructure that's going to do the hard stuff, is to bring people in, the marketing and the expertise and how they're structured, and have not just one person, but to have a group, a team that says, okay, you need to do the marketing, you need to work with National Shooting Sports, you need to work with manufacturing. This is how we're going to market the tourism and all this stuff. And so how are we going to get this thing? What I want to see is I want to ring the bell, and I want this horse running out of the gate just as fast as they can, because I would like to see this thing actually do a ribbon cutting within the next 18 months or 2 years from now. By we get to 2025 as construction, by mid-2026, we're doing the ribbon cutting, and this thing's got all the bells and whistles up. That's one of the things that the only proposal that I saw that had actually already gone out and hired private sector consultants to come in and look at them, because these guys are serious about getting out of the gate and running hard. And they said, look, Park County says, we've already laid out these. And now we may change those. This is something that we had anticipated the tax force to hire some of these professionals and consultants to come and help. They're already a leg up. They've done this. They've spent their money up front. They said, we're going to get this thing up and running because it is a great system. They got a great location, but money is an issue. And I think either one of them has the capacity to actually fund this long term. I really do believe that. And I think there's a long-term commitment from the state of Wyoming on this. All the more reason, from a legislative standpoint, the quicker we can get this up to running and it starts working, it's easier than if this thing lingers on.
Success is attractive. If it's successful, people will pile on.
That's
the support will stay there. It won't just idle by and just become a sideshow.
Yeah.
Like, it can build momentum continually.
Inertia is very important. Once you get that momentum, you don't want to stop it.
Oh, it's contagious.
And within the two proposals, both of them can work. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind of that. But I'm really focused this my time and effort. We have the most inertia. That's where I think we need to go. Not to say that it can't be done, but I just think there's other Park counties a little bit further ahead than the proposal from Campbell County on that. They've already spent money up front looking at this thing. That horse is ready to run.
And the buy-in from their community, not only the county, but the city. It almost, when you think of firearms and you think of Wyoming, Cody just comes to mind with what it has. And so you almost, at least in the way I'm trying to process this, you're almost trying to figure out reasons how Campbell County can overcome some of that, because there is so much success within that realm with the Cody area.
Cash is king.
And for me, it is two very, I don't know if we could have had two more diverse proposals make it to the final two.
Yeah.
Because Cody checked the boxes. Cody read the RFP and responded to the RFP very well. And they scored first in site, fourth in accommodations, first in business plan. So they were first in 3 of the 4 categories. And Gillette was first in no category, but they were high average on everything. But when you look at the two proposals, and let's just take governance structure off the table for a minute and say, we'll negotiate something with either one of them that everyone's happy with. So then you get down to those other 3 things, and you have Campbell County that is adjacent to everything. It is, you can look out the front window of any house in town and see this property. But it's an okay property. It's not a fantastic, like, the trade-offs are just crazy. But then you take Campbell County coming this morning and say, we know that there's some curiosity about deficits. We're going to bring $3 million to an operating fund at time of launch.
I think that proposed joint powers board ownership of the land, like, I feel like that was probably the
That was a very big concession right there.
Yeah, if they can push that across and that's the way it happens, that's huge.
It makes them eligible for grants because they're a joint powers board, not a state-owned piece of property. It's like they couldn't be more diverse. It's going to be an interesting...
5,200 acres, room for expansion,
yeah.
Camplex close proximity to be able to complement this. They're both very attractive.
Gillette wasn't on my, like when I looked at it at the beginning, I picked out, here's 3 places where this is probably going to land. Gillette wasn't there.
Yeah.
They scored well. They didn't score at the top, but they are a real viable option.
It will succeed in either location. And
Yeah.
that's a nice place to be from a
task force standpoint. You're right.
if we only had one contender and we were trying to get concessions out of that, that's a lot harder than, this can go either place and probably do.
Chairman Hicks, you've been involved in many task force, many of which I've sat on with you. Overall, when you look back at the effort that the task force has put forth to get to this point, is it where you thought it would be?
I have to admit, and unlike everybody, we stumbled around trying to the first, and I think there was some frustration. Me and my co-chair that sponsored this legislation didn't want to come in and say, this is what your job is, ladies and gentlemen, because quite frankly, we wanted to maintain the absolute maximum flexibility and creative. What I've seen in the last year is this task force has coalesced. It is a team. Before, we were just a bunch of scattered individuals, and some of us had pretty strong opinions one way or other. My 2 colleagues here today, amongst them, I should say, excuse me, my 3 colleagues here, Josh. But that's what made us our strength. This format that we went through, and thanks to Aaron and everybody that looked at put together the emphasis, this is a model as to how these things should really work. Because we created everything and it was a team effort, and we got to the results from the last couple of days in these presentations. We were all concerned that we'd all be taking an hour break every day, and we weren't getting done in 2 hours because the entire task force is engaged. The people were enthusiastic. The proposals were diverse. They had a lot of detail in some of them. We just had to dig through these things. I am so pleasantly pleased at the outcome of the last 2 days. It far exceeded anything that I thought we would get done as a task force. And so I think this has been a tremendous success.
Yeah, and I think when people hear that there were 9 proposals that were put forth, if you didn't have the opportunity to be able to look and really go through those with a fine-tooth comb, I think folks think, was this just a 3 or 4 pager? These were 50, 60-page documents.
281.
258 one on them.
When you talk about the equity that these 9 communities put forward, I think that just reemphasizes the priority of the significance that this complex will bring as a nice addition to those communities. I look forward to continuing this journey with the 3 of you and the other members of our task force. I think we're on the right track. I know there will be a tough decision that'll have to be made, and I think it'll be obvious to us where each of us land with the information that we have in this next step of the process. But I think this process is working. I think it's a success, and I think Wyoming is going to be very proud wherever we end up. And it's very encouraging for you to say and hear you say that the timeline that you're thinking about is in the very short term, and I think that's very important. I think when you talk about the amount of expenditures that this investment is going to have, there are a lot of things that have to really line up for it to work in the order that you've put forth. But you feel like we can do that?
Absolutely. Complete confidence in both entities being able to do that. Obviously, there's one's a little bit further ahead than the other, but that doesn't mean that it can't still all happen under that time frame. And what I really look forward to is standing on the site 2 years from now with the task force and the governor, and we get to cut a ribbon and tip our hats and say, job well done.
And shoot one of those new Gunwerks muzzle loaders. Gents, I appreciate anything you want to add before we close. I would like to know and go ahead and put this out there that we can do a follow-up once the final decision is made, because I know the details of what will lead us to that point are yet to be unfleshed, but they're going to be valuable to share, and I think we'll get there.
Glad to be here.
Senator Hicks?
Yep.
Been a fun journey and looking forward to closing it out.
Another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. Happy trails.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.